Hello, this is Manny Correa. In this video we're going to talk about virtualization and creating a virtual machine. The first thing you have to think about is what operating system you want to run on your virtual machine. We've already installed Virtualbox, so that's what we are going to be, the software we're going to be using to run our guest operating system in, or our virtual machine. Virtualbox is called a hypervisor. It is a hypervisor type 2 because we're doing desktop virtualization. So where do we find our operating system or the program that we need to install? The operating system is put on a file called an ISO file or ISO file. This is called a disk image file. For us, we're going to be using Ubuntu, so we're going to go to ubuntu.com. In here, we'll be able to download the file that we need for ubuntu.com. The version that we're going to run is 20.04, which is not the latest and greatest, but it is what's called the long-term support or LTS version of Ubuntu. So you click on the green button there, and then we can what will happen is after a matter of seconds you'll be asked to download. And so this is the desktop version that we're going to start with. It's called Ubuntu 20.04.1-desktop-AMD64 ISO. This means it's a 64-bit version of the desktop operating system Ubuntu. It is a Linux distribution that we're going to be using. For our needs, we can run all of the applications that we need for the entire course. I will show you how to run at a later date the server version and other types of versions or other flavors of Ubuntu and what they look like. This is a fairly large file, 2.6 gig, and I have a very slow connection right now. I'm pretty sure I have a version of this already downloaded somewhere. So I have the 2004 desktop version right here on my external hard drive. So I have a 500 gig hard drive attached to my machine also. So I can use this 2.2 and see it's a disk image file. This means it's an ISO file. It's 2.6 gigabytes. It's fairly large. So when we open up our software, our hypervisor software, Virtualbox, you're going to see this window. These are two virtual machines that I have in there already. Ignore those. We're going to click New, and we're going to name it. I'm going to name mine Disney. I just like to use Disney as an example. It just keeps things simple. And we're going to change the type to Linux, and then what version of Linux or what distribution of Linux, we're going to go to Ubuntu 64-bit. And then we click Next, and then we say how much RAM are we going to give this. In our case, you want to give it at least 4 gig. I like to give mine around 8 gig. So give that 8192, that's fine. In your case, depending on how much RAM you have on your system, you're probably going to be around 4 gig. Your virtual machine won't run as fast or as smoothly, but it should be able to be okay for some of the things we need in our course. We're going to create the virtual disk now, so that's the default setting. We're going to use virtual disk image, so that's default setting. We're going to dynamically allocate, which means that the hard drive is only going to take up as much space as we need for our virtual machine. We're going to allocate 20 gig, but it's not going to take the full 20 gig. It's only going to take as much as we consume. And so instead of 10 gig, we're going to change this to 20 gig. So 20 gig storage is what we want to use for our virtual machine. And right now that is powered off. So before you start this, you have to point it to your ISO file. So with it selected, highlighted here, we need to go back into settings, of the virtual machine, go down to Storage, select the controller IDE and the empty disk there. See how it looks like a CD? And then over on the right, there's another one that looks like a CD. We have to click that, and then we need to choose a virtual disk file, or choose a disk file that we want to use. So now we have to point to the disk file or disk image file that we're going to use for our virtual machine. I'm going to go to my external hard drive and point to 20.04 desktop image AMD64, which is the one I asked you to download, and then you click Open, and then we click OK, and then that should be attached to it. So the next thing we do is start it. So we can just push Start with it highlighted, and it should power on the virtual machine. And that's the one we want to start. Click Yes. And this you don't have to worry about. When you're running a virtual machine, your keyboard and mouse gets trapped or gets attached to your virtual machine inside this window. And it's installing some software, and all you have to do is just go click those to, they're just notifications for yourself. You notice my mouse isn't moving around until I go out of the window. When I bring it into the window, it stays in there. So it's installing some of the, from the ISO file, clicking into or creating the operating system that you're going to want to run in your virtual machine. The virtual environment is basically software faking out the operating system that it has hardware running around it. And the hardware is all the hardware that the operating system needs to run, like CPU, like hard drive, like video card, like sound card, like network support. All these hardware features that you have in your PC is the environment that the software is emulating for the virtual machine. And our software is Virtualbox. Remember, Virtualbox is a hypervisor type 2 piece of software doing desktop virtualization. It's installing. You'll see a purple screen. It should come up and ask us a couple of questions fairly soon. This is installing all the software that we need to run our operating system. Oh, I never knew that it had sound. So we want to install Ubuntu. We don't want to try it. That means you're not going to be using it permanently. We want to use it permanently, on a permanent basis. And we're going to use English, and then we're going to continue. And we're going to do normal installation, and for now we're not going to download the updates while installing Ubuntu. We'll do that afterwards. If you want to do it at home, you can do it at home, but for time's sake, for this video, we're not going to do that right now. This is a feature that you make sure we're creating a virtual machine. It's the 20 gig of storage that we're giving to it, so it's going to erase everything that's on that drive. We're just going to click Install Now. We don't worry about any of the advanced features right now. And then this is telling you how it's partitioning out the drive. We'll talk about partitioning and how drives are set up later on. Right now we're just going through the install process. We need to select our time zone, Eastern Standard or New York time. And now you need to make sure that you name this. I'll give mine Disney World. And now you need to have a user. So me personally, I'm just going to use Mickey, and a password that I use with mine. There is password complications or complexities that you have to worry about. So I think there is caps 8 characters long, and maybe numbers or special characters that you can use in there. Remember your passwords. That's the only thing. I cannot break into your versions of Linux. So if you don't write it down and remember it, you're going to lock yourself out, which is okay. You just rebuild it again. It only takes 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes tops to install, depending on the machine you're running it on. Right now, we're copying the files in there. It should go fairly quickly for us. We did all the settings already. That's the basic settings. One of the problems using desktop software is you get all of the multimedia software that goes along with it. So like music players, video players, and any advertising that the makers or the supporters of Ubuntu, which is called Canonical, wants to present to you. So they will install software that they think you may use or they may want you to use. We'll go through different types of software that is very helpful for individuals and different types of setup. But Ubuntu as a desktop is fairly easy to use and very useful. It comes with a lot of software that you can use for like an Office suite, Calibri Office suite. It is fairly robust. If you want to do image editing, GIMP, which they just mentioned right here, is another one. I've never used the Shotcut video editor. I use DaVinci, which is another free version of software. Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is actually a fairly robust version of an open source software that you can use. Open source means it's free, that you can use it and not have to pay anybody to use it, and you get updates as long as the updates are there. Okay, now that the software is installed, I have to restart the virtual machine, and what's going to happen is we can boot up into our desktop after we log in. So it should do like a soft reboot. Hit enter, and it should boot up again. Now this is 2004, which is long-term support for Ubuntu desktop. Long-term support means that the desktop version will be supported for 3 years and the server version will be supported for 5 years, compared to the short-term support, which is only 18 months for both. And that's kind of why I like to use the long-term support version. I will typically use one version for at least a year, if not 2 years, for the course. So once we've booted up, you have a sign-in screen, very similar to your Windows sign-in screen. You mouse over your icon, and then it should put in the password that you put for your account. And we're booting up. Should only take a few seconds here to boot up. Come on, baby. Last minute settings. I know you can do this. There we go. And we have gone into Ubuntu desktop. Right now you don't want to connect any of these things. This is just if you're going to use a desktop as your personal desktop. So we're going to skip. We're just going to skip this. We're going to next. Don't send things to Canonical. For us, it doesn't matter. And we don't worry about location services for us. And don't open software now. We'll do that later on. And we're going to click done. And this is the desktop. So that is the Ubuntu desktop version 2004 install process in a virtual machine in Virtualbox. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.